Hi, it's me, Jacob Reinhold, and I'm here to give a video review of the movie 1917, directed by, let me check. Oh, it's recording on my phone. So, directed by a guy, and I'm doing like a historical type review where I talk about history and whatnot. So, if you're living under some kind of a rock, 1917 takes place in the year 1917, which was actually during World War I, where the whole world was fighting for like the second or third time, but we call it World War I because like it was the first time that it happened on such a big scale. So the film actually follows I think it's a private and a lieutenant. So it follows two characters in the British Army during World War I on the front lines fighting Germany. So back then they used trench warfare, which the movie actually represents pretty well. And it follows these two characters as they actually have to travel across no man's land to get to another section of trenches to warn them of a German trap, basically. And the interesting thing that this movie does is the whole movie is actually done in one shot. So, or it's not actually done in one shot, but it's filmed to make you think that it's only done in one shot. And what that actually does is make the pretty much day and a half's journey of the events of the film feel very long. And a lot of people actually didn't like that when they watched the movie. They said that it felt like boring and it felt like it dragged. I actually really enjoyed it because it felt realistic. It made me more easily able to put myself in the shoes of these soldiers and understand what it was like to live in these horrible conditions. Now, speaking about like actual historical accuracy and like the actual conditions of the trenches, I think they show that really well. In the very beginning, they show a lot of the soldiers in the British trenches, and the British trenches are all dirt. They're all just literally holes dug into the ground. These men are dirty, they're laying on the ground, they're just trying to read to pass the time. A lot of them don't even have access to proper like utilities like bathrooms and showers and baths and stuff like that, so they're all dirty and gross. But then when they actually travel to the German front line and they walk through some German trenches, the German trenches are much better fortified. The German trenches are primarily concrete, and that's actually historically accurate because back in World War I, Germany, when they were building their trenches, viewed it as their new border. So they thought that it would be a lot more useful to them to make permanent trenches to protect their new border, so they made them concrete. They had proper bedrooms and facilities and stuff like that. Some of them were able to get plumbing and electricity lined through them, but in Britain they had the plan of constantly retaking land that was stolen by Germany, so they had their dirt trenches that weren't meant to last too long, and I think the movie showed that really well. Another thing that the movie shows really well is trench warfare itself. We really don't see this until the end of the movie, but the way warfare happened back then was basically you shot artillery and pot shots at each other from your trenches, and every once in a while you'd run at the enemy trench. And the final shot of the movie is basically just showcasing one of these attacks, where the entire British line and that section of the trench is just running forward. They're not really shooting at anyone. There's no cover. It's an open field. They're just getting mowed down as they're leaving these trenches. And that was actually a real thing that happened. In the beginning of the movie, we get to see no man's land, which was the space in between the trenches. And we see the effects of this trench warfare. When you're running across fields with no cover or protection at all, you're gonna die really easily. So in the beginning of the movie, when they're moving across no man's land, they're basically bobbing and weaving around bodies the entire time. There's actually this really gross scene where the main character trips and his hand lands on the body of a British soldier and it goes through the person's body because it was like decomposing. It's really gross. So on a historical end, it actually represented warfare in the trenches really well. The costume design was great. We see a couple German soldiers, not that many. Another thing that it conveyed really well was the confusion of warfare. There's multiple scenes in the movie where an individual British and German soldier will see each other, and for a minute, they don't really know what to do. It's almost as if you're seeing a stranger on the side of the road, you can kind of see in the faces of these soldiers that they don't really want to fight each other. So it takes some time for them to actually realize, like, oh, wait, we're at war. We should be fighting now. So that was really interesting, and I really enjoyed seeing that. My sister's staring at me from the window right now. I don't like that. But similar to 1917, we're going to try to keep this in one cut to keep it flashy and whatnot. So another part of the movie that was really interesting, besides seeing how the soldiers reacted to the war, was also the plot itself and how that developed. So at this point, I'm going to get into spoilers for the movie. If you haven't seen it, I mean, I know I'm really only talking to like a couple friends and teachers, but if you haven't seen 1917, I really recommend seeing it. It got nominated for an Oscar, and I really think it deserved it. I mean, you have to be in the mood to watch a serious movie, but I say you watch it if you can. So getting into the plot, like I said, it follows these two young British soldiers traveling through no man's land to get to another section of the British trenches. And they actually build up these two characters. I gotta be honest, I can't remember their names, but there's one who is a private and one who's a lieutenant. And they build up the private to be the main character. Because from the very beginning, the private is kind of like the happy-go-lucky one. He's thinking like, oh, come on, we're going to get through the trenches. And the whole reason that he's selected for this mission is because he wants to go save his brother, who's in that other section of the trenches that's about to fall for a trap. And so the private is set up to be the main character. We primarily see everything from his point of view. We see him receive orders, and he selects his friend, the lieutenant, to go on this mission with him. So the thing that's actually really surprised me was not too long into the movie, I think it had to be maybe half an hour, 40 minutes in, the private actually dies because he tries to save a German soldier, but they don't speak the same language. And in the confusion, the German soldier actually stabs him. And because this movie only takes place in one shot, you have to watch as the lieutenant holds the private in his arms and basically has to watch him bleed out and die. And it was really messed up. Like, it really got me thinking, and I got really sad, and I felt some feelings, I'm not gonna lie. But the thing that really surprised me was from a storytelling perspective, how they set up this one character to be the main character, and then the lieutenant, who really didn't want to go on this mission, and really wasn't too keen on the war, and didn't like what was going on, and didn't want anything to do with this mission at all, becomes the main character. So I have to follow this reluctant character as he travels through the rest of the mission in honor of his friend that died. Because at this point, he's fighting more in the memory of his friend than himself actually wanting anything to do with it. And in the end of the movie, he does succeed. He gets to the front lines and is able to warn them of the attack. But there's just this really good scene where at the end, he sits under this tree and he's just thinking about like what's happened. And he just falls asleep there. Like, he's exhausted. He's traveled for about 2 days to try to get this message across the trenches. And there he is, just sleeping under a tree now that it's done. But the thing that's really interesting about it is that the war didn't end at any point near 1917. I believe it continued for another year or two. I'm gonna have to look that up again. But he does all of this. He went through this entire battle just so that he could save a couple soldiers, and the war's not even done yet. That was just one day in this years-spanning, country-spanning war. We saw one day on one front of the span of like maybe 5 miles. Think about all of the concurrent stories that were happening at the same time, all of the soldiers that died, all of the soldiers that went through this, and it really gives you a better perspective of the war itself. Now, I'm not really keen on the inaccuracies of this movie. I do know that a lot of stuff was really accurate, but the thing that I think makes this movie the most important is how it conveys time and how it makes you really relate to this conflict, because it was about 100 years ago now. So a lot of people don't think about World War I as much as they think about World War II, but I think watching this movie gives you a very important reason to think about it more and to relate to it more. So that's basically going to finish up my review. I talked about some inaccuracies, I talked about some accuracies, I talked about my general thoughts on the movie, what I think it did well. I don't really have any major complaints. I thought it was pretty great all the way around, and I'm going to give it my final score of 9 out of 10. Almost perfect. It didn't scream at me that this was the perfect example of a movie, but it was pretty close. So stick around for other video movie review things, and I hope you enjoyed.